When a billionaire decides to remarry 3 years after a difficult divorce, he invites his ex-wife to the ceremony to shame her, but ends up in complete shock when she shows up with a pair of twins who look just like him. Alexander Gray stood before the grand window of his penthouse, the city sprawling below like a glittering tapestry of power and ambition. He sipped his scotch, letting the warmth of the amber liquid seep into him. 3 years had passed since his life unraveled, since Catherine's betrayal shattered the foundation of their marriage. Yet here he was, rebuilt, stronger than ever. His empire was thriving, his name untarnished, and soon, he would take a step Catherine could never have imagined, remarrying. The wedding would be an event to remember, lavish, sophisticated, the pinnacle of high society. And at the heart of it, Isabel. She was everything Catherine had failed to be, elegant, composed, unwavering in her loyalty. Alexander adored her calm confidence, the way she seemed immune to the chaos his life sometimes brought. She was his fresh start, a symbol of his triumph over the heartbreak and humiliation Catherine had inflicted. But triumph demanded witnesses. The idea had taken root a month ago, as he sat with his inner circle over dinner. Someone had mentioned Catherine in passing, a thoughtless comment about her quiet life since their divorce, and Alexander's mind had sparked. What better way to show the world, and Catherine herself, how far he'd come than by inviting her to his wedding? It wasn't revenge, not exactly. It was closure. A way to put the past behind him with the kind of finality only an event like this could provide. His best friend, Marcus, had voiced the first objection. "Alex, this isn't a good idea. Inviting her is like poking a hornet's nest. She won't cause trouble," Alexander had replied with a dismissive wave. "Catherine knows better than that. She's too proud." "It's not about her causing trouble," Marcus pressed. "It's about you. You've moved on, or at least, that's what you keep telling us. So why give her any more space in your life?" Alexander had shrugged, unwilling to admit the complexity of his emotions even to his closest confidant. He wasn't looking for approval. He was looking for an ending. Now, the gilded invitation lay on the desk behind him, embossed with Isabel's and his names in delicate gold script. It was a work of art, like everything else about the wedding, from the designer floral arrangements to the 6-course dinner planned by one of the city's top chefs. He envisioned Catherine opening it, her expression unreadable, the reality of his new life sinking in. It wasn't spite that motivated him, he told himself. It was the need to prove, if only to himself, that her betrayal had not defined him. Isabel had raised her eyebrows when he told her of his plan. "You're inviting your ex-wife to our wedding?" "Alexander, why?" "She's a part of my past," he explained. "I don't want there to be any lingering ghosts. This is about closure." Isabel studied him, her serene face giving little away. "If you think it's the right thing to do, I trust you." Her trust meant everything to him, and he vowed not to let her down. Catherine would come, see the life he had built without her, and leave. There would be no drama, no confrontation. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had the last word. The morning the invitation was delivered, Alexander found himself unusually restless. He occupied himself with meetings and calls, but his mind wandered back to Catherine. What was her life like now? He hadn't asked, hadn't cared to ask? As far as he was concerned, she was a chapter already written, closed, and shelved. She had taken so much from him, his trust, his belief in forever, but she hadn't taken everything. He still had his ambition, his drive, and now Isabel. The phone buzzed on his desk, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Marcus. "She got it," Marcus said without preamble. "Catherine." "How do you know?" "Because she called me, Alex. She wanted to know if you were serious." "What did you tell her?" "I told her it was your idea and that I thought it was a bad one." Alexander laughed humorlessly. And she didn't say much after that. Just thanked me and hung up." He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. "She'll come. Of course she'll come. Catherine's not one to let an invitation like this slide." But Alex, you'd better prepare yourself for whatever she brings with her. What could she possibly bring that would matter to me? There was a long pause before Marcus replied. I don't know. I just hope you're right. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of activity. Isabel was radiant, her excitement contagious as they finalized the details. Alexander allowed himself to relax, to believe that everything was falling into place. Catherine's RSVP arrived without fanfare, simple, understated, much like the woman herself had always been. He pushed thoughts of her aside, focusing instead on Isabel and the future they were building. On the eve of the wedding, Alexander stood once more at the penthouse window, looking out at the city that had given him everything. He thought of Catherine, of the life they had once imagined together, and of how it had all crumbled under the weight of her betrayal. Tomorrow, he would put it all behind him. Tomorrow, he would finally be free. Or so he thought. The night before the wedding, Alexander barely slept. He told himself it was excitement, the anticipation of finally closing the chapter of his past and stepping into the future with Isabel. But beneath that polished surface, there was a nagging tension he couldn't quite shake. Catherine's RSVP had arrived without drama, but something about it unsettled him. He'd stared at the crisp card for far too long before finally tossing it aside. It didn't matter. She was nothing but a guest now, a spectator to his triumph. Morning arrived with all the splendor expected of a billionaire's wedding. The sprawling estate buzzed with orchestrated perfection, pristine white flowers, crystal chandeliers, and rows of immaculately dressed guests. The media presence outside the gates was heavy, eager to capture the society event of the year. Alexander stood in the dressing room, adjusting his cufflinks with practiced ease, but in the mirror, he caught something in his own eyes that he didn't like. Doubt. Marcus, as always, was there to cut through his thoughts. You look like a man walking into a battlefield instead of a wedding. Alexander smirked. Same thing, isn't it? Marcus exhaled, folding his arms. Catherine's coming. You sure you're ready for that? She's a footnote, Marcus. This is my story now. But deep down, he wondered. The ceremony began flawlessly. Isabel floated down the aisle with a grace that left everyone breathless. Alexander's heart swelled at the sight of her, a beacon of everything good and refined. She was the future, the carefully sculpted picture of his success. As they exchanged vows under the golden afternoon light, he felt the weight of his past lifting. Catherine had no power here. Or so he thought. The reception was in full swing when she arrived. Alexander spotted her from across the grand ballroom just as the first toast was being raised. The crowd seemed to shift around her, murmurs spreading like wildfire. She stood in the entrance, dressed in a simple, understated gown, her hair swept back in an effortless style that made her seem even more composed than he remembered. But it wasn't Catherine that drew everyone's attention. It was the two children clutching her hands, a boy and a girl, both around 3 years old. Alexander's breath caught in his throat. The twins stood silently beside their mother, wide-eyed and solemn in their formal outfits. And in that moment, the world tilted off its axis. Because staring back at him were his own eyes. His own features, softened and mirrored in the innocent faces of the children standing beside Catherine. The noise of the reception faded to a dull hum in the background. The champagne flute in his hand trembled slightly before he set it down. Isabel, beside him, had gone still, her fingers tightening around his arm. Across the room, Catherine smiled, a bittersweet, knowing smile, and with an almost imperceptible nod, she approached. Guests whispered in hushed tones, some stealing glances while others openly gawked. Alexander's mind raced, grasping for an explanation, a denial, anything that could make sense of what he was seeing. But no amount of logic could erase the undeniable resemblance standing before him. Catherine stopped a few feet away, her gaze steady. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was soft but unwavering. "Meet your children, Alex." The words hit him harder than he expected. He swallowed, his throat dry. "What? What the hell are you talking about?" Catherine's expression didn't waver. "James and Olivia. They're yours." She looked down at them, stroking the boy's hair gently. "They've always been yours." Isabel's grip on his arm loosened, but she said nothing. Her silence was more unnerving than any outburst could have been. Alexander could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on him, waiting for his reaction, waiting to see the perfectly composed billionaire unravel in real time. His jaw clenched, his voice coming out low and dangerous. "You're lying." Catherine tilted her head slightly, a trace of sadness in her eyes. "Why would I lie about something like this?" Alexander took a step closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You cheated on me, Catherine. You threw everything away. And now you expect me to believe? I expect you to face the truth." Her voice wavered, but only slightly. "I found out I was pregnant after you left. I tried to tell you, but you wouldn't listen. You were too busy erasing me from your life." His pulse pounded in his ears. "You should have tried harder." Catherine's lips parted, as if to argue, but then she simply sighed. "Maybe I should have. But I did what I thought was best." Her eyes flickered toward Isabel, who remained eerily composed. "And I thought today might be my last chance to make you see." Alexander's hands curled into fists at his sides. This wasn't happening. Not today. Not like this. The little girl, Olivia, tugged lightly at Catherine's dress and looked up at him with innocent curiosity. "Mommy, is he our daddy?" Alexander felt the breath leave his lungs in a painful rush. The room felt too small, the air too thick. He had spent 3 years building a new life, a better life, one free from the wreckage of his past. And now, in the span of mere moments, Catherine had shattered it all over again. Isabel's voice finally cut through the silence. "Alexander." He turned to her, his eyes searching hers for reassurance, for anger, for anything, but she simply looked exhausted, as if she had always suspected that the past wasn't truly buried. "I need a moment," he muttered, stepping away from the crowd, away from Catherine and the children who bore his face. He walked briskly toward the garden, the cool evening air offering no relief from the fire raging inside him. His entire world had just shifted on its axis, and for the first time in a long time, Alexander Gray had no idea what to do. Behind him, Catherine stood in the doorway, holding her children close, watching him walk away. The air outside was crisp, but it did nothing to cool the heat rising in Alexander's chest. He stood in the dimly lit garden, hands braced against the stone balustrade, staring out at the sprawling estate grounds without really seeing them. His mind was a hurricane of anger, confusion, and something far more dangerous, doubt. Children. His children. It didn't make sense. It couldn't. Catherine had destroyed him once already. Her betrayal, her affair, the way she ripped through their marriage like it had meant nothing. And now, out of nowhere, she had the audacity to show up at his wedding with twins who looked just like him. Footsteps crunched against the gravel behind him. He didn't need to turn to know who it was. "You have a lot of nerve showing up here like this," he said, his voice cold. Catherine stepped closer, her arms wrapped around herself as if warding off the chill. "I didn't come here to ruin your wedding, Alex." He let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "You expect me to believe that?" He finally turned to face her, his eyes dark with fury. "You had 3 years to tell me, Catherine. 3 years, and you chose today?" His voice cracked slightly, and he hated how raw he sounded. "I tried," she said softly, her expression laced with something close to regret. "I tried so many times. But you wouldn't hear me. You wouldn't even let me speak." Alexander scoffed, shaking his head. "That's bullshit." Catherine lifted her chin. "Do you remember after the divorce, when I called your office? When I tried to meet you at the gala last year? Your assistant never let me through. I even sent letters, Alex. You were too busy making sure I was erased from your life to see what I was trying to say." He clenched his jaw. It was true that after the divorce, he had buried himself in his work, surrounding himself with walls so high no one, especially not Catherine, could breach them. But this? It felt like a desperate excuse. "You should have tried harder," he snapped. "You should have shown up at my door." Catherine's eyes flashed with something dangerously close to anger. And be thrown out by your security team? Be humiliated again? I made a choice, Alex. I raised them on my own because I thought that was what you wanted. Her voice trembled slightly. I didn't want them to grow up feeling unwanted. His chest tightened, the accusation in her words cutting deep. You don't get to make that choice for me, he said, his voice lower now. If they're mine, I deserve to know. I was scared, she admitted, and for the first time, her calm mask slipped. I thought you'd reject them. I thought you'd see them as another mistake tied to me. She swallowed hard. I wasn't sure you could love them. Alexander stared at her, stunned by the brutal honesty in her words. A part of him, one he'd buried under layers of success and indifference, felt an ache at the idea that she truly believed he wouldn't have cared. But then, the memories of her betrayal came rushing back, and his expression hardened. This doesn't change what you did, he said tightly. I know. Catherine's voice was barely above a whisper. A new voice cut through the tension. Alexander. Isabel stood at the garden entrance, her face unreadable, but there was a tension in her posture that hadn't been there before. She stepped forward slowly, her eyes shifting between him and Catherine, then landing on the distant glow of the ballroom behind them. I think we need to talk. He straightened, rubbing his temples. Isabel, I will talk later, she interrupted, her voice laced with controlled frustration. But for now, I need to know, is this real? Are they yours? Alexander exhaled slowly. I don't know. But I intend to find out. His gaze flickered to Catherine, who nodded slightly in understanding. Isabel nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. I can't believe you didn't tell him sooner, she said to Catherine, a mixture of disbelief and quiet anger in her voice. I didn't want to ruin his life, Catherine replied, her expression weary. Isabel's eyes darkened. Well, congratulations. You did anyway. Without waiting for a response, she turned to Alexander. I need some time to think. And honestly, I don't know if I can do this right now. Isabel, I'm going to the hotel, she said firmly. We were supposed to leave for the honeymoon tomorrow. Let me know if that's still happening. Without another word, she turned and walked back toward the house, disappearing into the swirling crowd of well-dressed guests, oblivious to the drama unfolding outside. Alexander felt the weight of her words pressing down on him like an iron fist. His perfect life, his perfect plans, everything was unraveling. He turned back to Catherine, who looked visibly exhausted but determined. You're not leaving, not yet, he said firmly. I want a DNA test. She nodded. Of course. Whatever you need. For the first time that night, there was no anger in his voice, just quiet resignation. I need time. Catherine hesitated, then reached into her purse, pulling out a small envelope. I know you don't trust me, so I came prepared. She handed it to him. It's the paternity test. I had it done last year. I didn't want you to think I was lying. He stared at the envelope, feeling like the ground beneath him had disappeared. If you don't want to look at it now, I understand, she said. But they're yours, Alex. Whether you're ready to accept it or not. Catherine turned and walked back toward the house, leaving him alone with the envelope in his hands. He could hear the music drifting from the reception, laughter and clinking glasses, a celebration he was no longer a part of. He looked down at the envelope, fingers hovering over the seal. His entire world, everything he thought he knew, was inside. Alexander sat in his study, the unopened envelope still resting on his desk like a loaded weapon. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with the weight of everything Catherine had said. He had stared at that envelope for hours, fingers grazing the seal, but he couldn't bring himself to open it. Not yet. Instead, he ordered a fresh DNA test, one done by his people, in his way. Control. That's what he needed right now, and it was slipping through his fingers faster than he could catch it. Deep down, though, he already knew. He didn't need a test to see the truth. James had his sharp features, his stubborn brow, and Olivia's eyes were a mirror of his own when he was younger. It was undeniable, and that scared him more than he cared to admit. The past, which he had buried so meticulously, was clawing its way back. Memories of Catherine flooded his mind, how they used to laugh in bed late into the night, how she would trace lazy circles on his skin, whispering dreams of the future. And then the devastation. The night he found out about the affair. The sickening pit in his stomach, the feeling of betrayal so deep it still left an ache. He had loved her once, fiercely, desperately, and she had shattered him without a second thought. Now she was back, with children who should have been a part of his life all along. The anger boiled in him again, twisting and coiling until it left him restless. His phone buzzed, and he glanced at it, expecting another call from Marcus or one of his PR people trying to contain the situation. Instead, it was a message from Isabel. "I'm staying at the hotel for a few more nights. I need space to think." Alexander exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. Isabel had been slipping through his grasp since the moment Catherine arrived at the wedding. She had handled it with grace in public, smiling and nodding, but behind closed doors she had been distant. Detached. She wasn't the kind of woman who liked messy entanglements, and this was the definition of a mess. The honeymoon had been postponed indefinitely, and Alexander couldn't blame her. He wasn't sure if it could even happen now. She had asked him a question before she left, one that haunted him more than he wanted to admit. "Can you ever really let go of Catherine?" He had reassured her, told her the past was done, but standing there now, surrounded by the ghosts of what could have been, he wondered if he was lying to himself. Catherine wasn't just an ex-wife anymore. She was the mother of his children, and that changed everything. News outlets had already picked up on the scandal. His name was everywhere, headlines speculating on the twins, their resemblance to him, and whispers of a secret family hidden from the public eye. Social media was ablaze with speculation, dissecting every aspect of his life. Photos of him storming out of the reception were plastered on every news site, alongside pictures of Catherine and the twins looking calm, collected. He could only imagine what Isabel was thinking, seeing all of this play out in real time. Marcus had tried to get ahead of it, reassuring the press that Alexander was handling things privately, but the damage was done. Investors were cautious, board members whispering behind his back. His entire world, carefully curated and controlled, was now an open wound for the world to dissect. In the midst of the chaos, Catherine had remained frustratingly composed. She wasn't seeking attention, wasn't calling the press or trying to force his hand. If anything, it made him angrier. He wanted her to lash out, to give him a reason to push her away again. Instead, she had simply told him to be there if he wanted to be, and left the decision in his hands. He couldn't escape the image of the twins, though. The way James fidgeted when nervous, just like Alexander did as a child. The way Olivia's little hand had reached for Catherine's dress, the same way Alexander used to hold on to his mother's coat when he felt unsure of the world. He found himself standing in his closet late at night, staring at an old photograph tucked away in the back, a picture of him and Catherine on their honeymoon in Greece, laughing without a care in the world. He had forgotten how much he used to love her. Or maybe he had just convinced himself he did. The next morning, he received a message from Catherine. "I'm taking the kids to the park today if you want to meet us. No pressure. Just think about it." He stared at the message for a long time, his thumb hovering over the screen. He should ignore it. He should focus on his business, on fixing the damage this revelation had caused. But instead, he found himself typing a response. "I'll think about it." It was a small step, but one that sent a shiver of unease through him. He wasn't sure if he was stepping towards something or away from it. The DNA test results arrived in a sleek white envelope, delivered directly to Alexander's office by his most trusted assistant. He stared at it for a long moment, the weight of the truth pressing down on him before he even opened it. His fingers felt heavier than they should as he broke the seal and unfolded the crisp paper. 99.99% probability of paternity. There it was. No room for doubt. No room for denial. Olivia and James were his children. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly, his hands gripping the arms of his leather chair like a man bracing against a storm. The air in the room seemed too thick, the walls too close. His eyes drifted toward the skyline outside the window, but all he could see was Catherine's face at the wedding, the soft smile she'd worn when she introduced them to him. A sharp knock on the door snapped him out of his thoughts. Marcus stepped in without waiting for permission, his expression wary. "So?" Alexander tossed the paper onto the desk, letting it speak for itself. Marcus picked it up, his eyes scanning quickly before nodding, as if he'd expected nothing else. "I take it this doesn't change how you feel?" Marcus asked, setting the paper down carefully. Alexander ran a hand through his hair, frustration boiling just beneath the surface. "It changes everything and nothing at the same time." He stood, pacing the length of the room. "I should have known, Marcus. I should have seen it. And now she—" He stopped himself, shaking his head. "Now Catherine wants to play nice, offering to figure things out like none of this was her fault." Marcus sighed. "Alex, maybe it's not about fault anymore. Maybe it's about what comes next." Alexander shot him a sharp glare. "What comes next?" "I'll tell you what comes next. She's going to twist this to her advantage. She'll use those kids to make me the villain, to drag me back into her orbit too." He stopped short, his voice taut with anger. "Or," Marcus said evenly, "she's just trying to co-parent like she said." Alexander scoffed, turning away. "You think she's changed? People like Catherine don't change, Marcus. She did this to ruin me." But even as he said the words, something in him faltered. Seeing Olivia and James had stirred something deep inside him, something he wasn't ready to acknowledge. They were his, no matter how much he wanted to deny the circumstances. A part of him had always imagined having children, under different circumstances, with a different woman. And now, without warning, fatherhood had been dropped in his lap like an uninvited guest. Later that evening, he found himself in his penthouse, standing in front of Isabel as she read the test results. Her face betrayed no surprise, but the tension in her shoulders spoke volumes. "So, they're yours?" she said, folding the paper and setting it aside. She met his gaze, her eyes searching his face for something he wasn't sure he could give her. "Where does that leave us, Alex?" His jaw tightened. "Nothing changes between us," he said too quickly. Isabel's lips pressed into a thin line. "You say that, but I don't think you believe it." She sighed, stepping closer. "Look, I get it. This is overwhelming. But you have to decide if you're going to let Catherine keep pulling you back into the past, or if you're going to move forward with me." Her voice softened. "I love you, Alex. But I need to know I come first." He wanted to reassure her, to tell her she had nothing to worry about, but the words felt hollow. Instead, he said, "I need time to figure this out." Her eyes flickered with disappointment, but she nodded. "I'll give you space, but I won't wait forever." With that, she turned and walked toward the bedroom, leaving him alone with his thoughts. Alexander poured himself a drink, sinking into the sofa. His mind drifted to the twins. He remembered the way Olivia had clung to Catherine's hand, the quiet way James had observed him with cautious curiosity. They didn't know him. He was a stranger to them, a ghost of a father they'd never met. Against his better judgment, he picked up his phone and scrolled through the messages Catherine had sent earlier in the day. "I know you're angry. But they deserve to know you. Let's meet tomorrow. Just us and the kids." He stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the screen. Every instinct in him screamed to cut this off before it became more complicated. But a quieter voice, the one he had spent years ignoring, whispered something else: "They deserve to know you." The next day, he found himself in the park Catherine had mentioned, standing stiffly by a bench as he watched her with the twins. Olivia was giggling as Catherine pushed her on a swing, and James was busy inspecting a pile of leaves, his brow furrowed in the same way Alexander's did when he was deep in thought. Catherine looked up and caught his eye. She gave him a small smile, but he didn't return it. Instead, he shoved his hands into his pockets and cleared his throat. "I'm here," he said, more to himself than to her. She stepped toward him, her eyes guarded but hopeful. "Thank you for coming." Alexander nodded, eyes fixed on James, who was now peeking up at him curiously. "I didn't come for you, Catherine. I came for them." A flicker of pain crossed her face, but she nodded. "That's all I wanted." As Olivia toddled over, tugging at his pant leg, Alexander felt something crack inside him. He crouched down, unsure of what to say or do, but Olivia didn't hesitate. She held out a small yellow flower to him, her tiny voice clear. "For you." His throat tightened. "Thanks, kid," he said gruffly, taking the flower. Catherine watched silently, and for a brief moment, the past and present blurred. But as much as he wanted to hold on to the bitterness, he couldn't ignore the undeniable pull of the children before him. Isabel's words echoed in his mind. "You have to decide." But standing there, looking into Olivia's bright eyes, Alexander realized that maybe, for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure what the right decision was. Alexander found himself in unfamiliar territory. Over the following weeks, his carefully structured life began to blur at the edges, the once clear lines between his past and present growing increasingly hazy. He met with the twins more often than he anticipated, always with a sense of reluctance that he couldn't shake. Each time he saw Olivia's infectious laughter or James's quiet, thoughtful stares, something within him stirred, a longing for the years he had missed, the innocence he had unknowingly abandoned. But with every smile, every hesitant "Daddy" from Olivia, there was an undercurrent of anger simmering beneath the surface. It wasn't fair. Catherine had stolen these moments from him, hidden them away like a secret she had no right to keep. And yet, despite his resentment, despite the betrayal that still burned in his chest, he couldn't walk away. Not now. The twins were oblivious to the tension, their world simple and untainted. They didn't know about the nights he lay awake, grappling with the thought of what his life could have been had things played out differently. They didn't know how often he found himself staring at Catherine when she wasn't looking, searching for traces of the woman he had once loved, and trying to reconcile her with the woman who had betrayed him. Catherine, for her part, was patient. Too patient. She didn't push, didn't demand anything from him. Instead, she simply let him exist in this limbo, offering quiet support when he allowed it and space when he needed it. He hated it. He wanted to fight, to scream, to blame her for everything that had gone wrong. But she never gave him the satisfaction. Isabel, however, was not nearly as forgiving. One evening, Alexander returned to the penthouse after spending the afternoon with the twins at the zoo. He had expected to find Isabel waiting, but the place was dark, eerily silent. When he finally spotted her, sitting on the edge of their bed with a suitcase half-packed beside her, his stomach dropped. "I can't do this anymore, Alex." Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, one he had heard too many times lately. "I thought I could handle it, but I was wrong." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Isabel, don't do this." She stood, crossing her arms. "Do what? Expect my fiancé to focus on our life? To be fully here with me instead of stuck in the past with Catherine and the children you didn't even know existed until weeks ago?" Her voice cracked slightly, but she quickly composed herself. "I can't compete with them, Alex. And I shouldn't have to." He took a step closer. "You're not competing with anyone. That's the problem," she shot back. "You don't even see it. You're so caught up in your anger, your guilt, whatever it is you feel when you look at those kids. You're losing yourself. And I won't be collateral damage." Alexander exhaled, frustration building. "I didn't ask for this, Isabel. I didn't plan for any of this." "No, but it's here," she said, her eyes searching his face. "And you need to figure out what you really want. If you want this life with me, you need to be all in. No more looking over your shoulder." He swallowed hard. "And if I can't?" She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then I walk." The air between them felt heavy with unspoken words, with years of plans unraveling in an instant. He wanted to fight for her, but the truth was, he wasn't sure what he was fighting for anymore. After Isabel left, Alexander found himself in the nursery he had once envisioned for the children he thought he'd have with her. It was empty now, a reminder of the life he had wanted, a life that seemed to be slipping further and further from his grasp. That night, he found himself outside Catherine's townhouse. He hadn't intended to come, but his feet had carried him there without conscious thought. Catherine answered the door, her expression unreadable. "Did something happen?" she asked, stepping aside to let him in. He walked past her, into the living room where toys were scattered across the floor, the faint sound of a bedtime story playing from the twins' room upstairs. He didn't respond right away, instead letting the reality of it all settle in around him. Finally, he spoke. "I don't know how to do this." Catherine sat down across from him, folding her hands in her lap. "I don't expect you to figure it all out overnight, Alex." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the ground. "You took them from me. You took the choice away." She nodded, her voice soft but unwavering. "I know. And I can't change that, no matter how much I wish I could." He let out a bitter laugh. "You always did have a way of making decisions for both of us." Catherine hesitated before speaking again. "I was scared. I didn't want them to go through what you went through with your father. The way you shut people out, the way you built walls. I was afraid they'd grow up feeling like an afterthought to your ambition." Alexander stiffened. "I'm not my father." "I know that," she said gently. "But you're still fighting the same battles he did, Alex. And you don't have to. Not with them." He looked up at her then, seeing something in her eyes that unsettled him, hope. Not for them, but for the family they could build for Olivia and James. And for the first time, he wondered if he was capable of giving them that. He stood, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on him. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do." Catherine offered a small, sad smile. "Be their father. The rest will come." He left without another word, the echo of her voice following him into the night. He wasn't sure if he could let go of the past, if he could forgive Catherine for what she had done. But as much as he wanted to run from it all, he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't run forever. Alexander spent the next few weeks trapped in a relentless cycle of indecision. Each day felt like a tug-of-war between the life he had built with Isabel and the one he had unexpectedly found waiting for him with Olivia and James. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't balance both worlds. The weight of it all was suffocating. Isabel had returned to their penthouse after a week of silence, but things were different now. The warmth between them had cooled, replaced by an uneasy tension that settled into every conversation, every glance. She had been patient, more patient than he deserved, but Alexander knew it wouldn't last forever. One evening, as they sat across from each other at the dinner table, Isabel finally broke the silence. "I can't do this anymore, Alex," she said, setting down her wine glass with a soft clink. "I feel like I'm constantly waiting for you to make a decision. And it's killing me." Alexander stared at his plate, pushing the food around absently. "I just need more time," he muttered, but the words sounded hollow even to him. Isabel sighed, her eyes searching his face for something that wasn't there. "No, you don't. You know what you want, you're just too afraid to admit it." She leaned forward, her voice softer but firm. "Do you love me, Alex? Or am I just an escape from everything you don't want to deal with?" He looked up at her then, and for the first time, he realized he didn't have an answer. He loved Isabel, of course he did, but love wasn't supposed to feel this exhausting. It wasn't supposed to feel like a choice between two lives that could never coexist. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed on the table. Catherine's name flashed across the screen, and Isabel's eyes darkened with quiet frustration. "Of course," she whispered under her breath. "It's always her." Alexander picked up the phone and stared at it for a long moment before silencing it and setting it back down. "It's about the kids." "It's always about the kids," Isabel said, pushing her chair back and standing. "And I get it, I really do. But I refuse to spend the rest of my life playing second to your past." She wrapped her arms around herself, looking tired, defeated. "I love you, Alex, but I won't fight for you anymore. If you want me, really want me, then prove it." He sat there long after she left the room, the weight of her words pressing into his chest like an anchor. And for the first time, he considered that maybe the problem wasn't Catherine or the twins, maybe the problem was him. That night, he stood by the window of his penthouse, staring out at the city that had once felt like his kingdom. Now, it felt like a prison. Everywhere he turned, reminders of his past loomed like shadows: his marriage to Catherine, their public fallout, and now, the children he never knew existed. He thought of his father then, of the cold way he had walked out of Alexander's life when things became too complicated. He had sworn he would never become that man. And yet, here he was, contemplating an escape that felt all too familiar. The next morning, he called Catherine. "I need to see you," he said, his voice clipped. There was a pause before she responded. "Of course. When?" "Tonight." Catherine arrived at his office just after dark, dressed simply, her face unreadable. She sat across from him, waiting for him to speak first. For a moment, he just looked at her, remembering the way things used to be before everything fell apart. "I can't do this anymore," he finally said, his voice low but steady. Catherine blinked, her expression guarded. "Do what?" "This, back and forth. The guilt, the anger, the trying to make sense of it all." He leaned forward, clasping his hands together. "I'm leaving, Catherine. I'm moving abroad with Isabel. We're starting over." Her face remained calm, but he saw the flicker of pain in her eyes. "And the twins?" she asked softly. Alexander swallowed hard. "I think it's best if I step away." Catherine's lips parted, as if to argue, but she closed them again, nodding slowly. "I see. I don't know how to be their father," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know how to look at them without thinking about everything we lost." He exhaled sharply. "I can't keep living in the past." Catherine studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, she stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the skyline. "You know, when I found out I was pregnant, I told myself I'd raise them alone if I had to. I convinced myself that was the right thing." She turned to face him, her eyes soft but unwavering. "But I always hoped you'd want to be a part of their lives. That maybe eventually you'd forgive me." Alexander looked away. "Some wounds don't heal, Catherine." She nodded, as if she had expected that answer. "I won't beg you to stay, Alex. But one day, you'll regret walking away from them." He didn't respond. Instead, he stood, walking past her to the door. "Goodbye, Catherine." She watched him go, tears brimming in her eyes but refusing to fall. The next few days were a blur of packing and finalizing plans. Isabel was cautious, wary, but she softened when he assured her he was ready to leave everything behind. They boarded the private jet bound for Europe, the city of their past shrinking beneath them. As they soared through the clouds, Alexander felt an eerie sense of relief, but it was tinged with something darker. Regret. He had done what needed to be done. He had chosen his future. But deep inside he wondered if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The streets of Paris were alive with the hum of everyday life, street musicians strumming guitars, cafe patrons lost in conversation, and the faint scent of fresh bread wafting through the air. Alexander walked beside Isabel, his hand loosely resting in hers, their matching designer coats shielding them from the crisp autumn breeze. The city had become their refuge, a place where he could reinvent himself without the weight of his past pressing down on him. And yet the emptiness lingered. It had been 3 months since they left. 3 months of late-night dinners, high-profile networking events, and weekends in the French countryside. Isabel had thrown herself into their new life with ease, adapting to the rhythm of a world she had always wanted to be a part of. Alexander, on the other hand, found himself going through the motions, telling himself that this was what he needed: distance, a fresh start, a clean slate. But no matter how many fine wines he sipped, no matter how many elegant soirees he attended, a quiet ache settled deep in his chest. It was an ache he couldn't drown in expensive distractions. Isabel sensed it. She didn't say much about it anymore, but Alexander could see it in the way she glanced at him when she thought he wasn't looking, the way she sometimes hesitated before speaking, as if she was afraid of what he might say. Or worse, what he might do. One afternoon, as they walked through the cobbled streets near the Seine, she stopped at a small boutique window, admiring a delicate silver bracelet. Alexander stood beside her, staring through the glass but seeing nothing. "You've been quiet today," she said softly. "I'm always quiet," he replied, attempting a smile. She turned to him, her expression gentle yet firm. "No, you're distracted. You have been for a while." He sighed, shoving his hands into his pockets. "I'm fine, Isabel." She studied him for a moment, then looked away. "I wonder if you really believe that." Alexander wanted to argue, to assure her that he was exactly where he wanted to be. But before he could, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out absent-mindedly, expecting an email from work or a text from Marcus checking in. Instead, it was a message from an unknown number. He hesitated, then opened it. A photo filled the screen. Olivia and James standing in a park, bundled up in tiny coats, their cheeks flushed with the cool air. James was grinning shyly at the camera, while Olivia held up a hand in a clumsy wave. The caption beneath the photo read, "They're doing great. Thought you'd want to know. Catherine." Alexander stared at the image, his chest tightening in ways he wasn't prepared for. He swallowed hard, his thumb hovering over the screen. For the first time in months, he felt something crack through the carefully constructed armor he had built around himself. He didn't realize he had stopped walking until Isabel touched his arm lightly. "Alex?" He looked up at her, quickly locking his phone and slipping it back into his pocket. "It's nothing," he said, his voice a little too tight. Isabel's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer before she simply nodded, turning back toward the shop window. But he could tell she didn't believe him. And maybe, deep down, either did he. That night, as Isabel slept beside him, Alexander sat on the balcony of their apartment, staring out at the glowing city skyline. The photo was still open on his phone, and he found himself tracing the tiny, familiar features of his children with his thumb. They looked happy. Happy without him. Catherine had built a life for them, a life that no longer had room for him. And perhaps, he thought bitterly, that was how it should be. He had made his choice. He had walked away. For better or worse, he had chosen a life free of complications, free of painful reminders. But as he sat there, the weight of his decision pressed down harder than it ever had before. Back home, Catherine sat in the living room, scrolling through old photos on her phone, while the twins slept soundly in their rooms. She hadn't expected a response from Alexander when she sent the picture earlier. She wasn't even sure why she had sent it in the first place. Maybe a part of her had hoped he would feel something, that he'd realize what he had left behind. But there was no reply. No acknowledgement. Sighing, she set her phone down and leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling. It still hurt sometimes, the way he had left so easily, as if they had been nothing more than a chapter he could close. But she had learned to let go of what could have been. Olivia and James were enough. They filled her days with laughter, her nights with purpose. And yet, in the quiet moments, when the house was still and her thoughts crept in, she wondered if he ever thought of them. If he ever regretted walking away. In Paris, Alexander finally closed the photo and tossed his phone onto the table. He rested his elbows on his knees, running a hand down his face. He had convinced himself that leaving was the right decision. That he had done what needed to be done. But tonight, for the first time, he wasn't so sure. Alexander sat in the sleek, modern living room of their Parisian apartment, staring at the untouched glass of scotch in his hand. The photo of Olivia and James burned in his mind, a constant presence he couldn't escape. No matter how many times he told himself that leaving was the right choice, the image of their smiling faces refused to fade. Days had passed since Catherine's message, yet he hadn't replied. He told himself there was no point, his decision had been made. But the hollow feeling inside him gnawed at his resolve, growing stronger with every silent moment. Isabel noticed. She always did. "You're somewhere else," she said one evening, standing by the window as the city lights cast a soft glow around her. Her voice was calm, but her eyes betrayed the exhaustion she carried. "And I'm tired of competing with it." Alexander looked up from his drink, feeling the weight of her words settle in his chest. "I'm not, don't." She cut him off gently, shaking her head. "We both know you are." She walked over and sat beside him, folding her hands in her lap. "I thought leaving would give us the fresh start we needed. But you're still tethered to something back home." He sighed, running a hand down his face. "I didn't ask for any of this, Isabel. I didn't know they existed." "I know," she said softly. "But now you do. And it's eating you alive." He wanted to deny it, to tell her that this life, this polished, effortless life, was all he wanted. But the words felt like ash in his mouth. Isabel reached out and took his hand, her grip firm but tender. "I love you, Alex," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I can't do this anymore. I can't build a life with someone who's only half here." His heart clenched, but he couldn't argue. He had been drifting, trapped in a limbo of his own making. And Isabel had been waiting for him to choose her, waiting for a decision he wasn't sure he could make. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his throat tight. Isabel squeezed his hand once, then let go. "So am I." The next morning, she was gone. She left behind a short note, written in her delicate handwriting. "Find what you're looking for. I hope it's worth it." Alexander sat with the note for a long time, staring at the words until they blurred. He had wanted to escape his past, to leave it all behind and start fresh with Isabel. But the truth had followed him across continents, slipping into his carefully curated life and pulling him back into a reality he couldn't outrun. That evening, he called Marcus. "Tell me I didn't screw everything up," Alexander said, staring out at the Paris skyline. On the other end, Marcus sighed. "You did. But it's not too late to fix it." Alexander let out a humorless laugh. "Fix it? How the hell am I supposed to fix something I walked away from?" "You show up," Marcus said simply. "You stop running. And you figure out what you really want before it's too late." His words hung in the air long after they ended the call. Alexander had spent his whole life making calculated decisions, taking risks only when they benefited him. But for the first time, he was faced with something he couldn't control, something messy and raw. And maybe that was the point. 2 days later, Alexander stood at the airport, a single suitcase at his feet. The ticket in his hand read New York, but it might as well have said home. As he boarded the plane, he felt a strange sense of relief settle over him, mingled with the fear he couldn't quite shake. He had no idea what he would say to Catherine, or how he would face Olivia and James after everything he had done. But for the first time in months, he felt like he was heading in the right direction. The plane touched down in New York under a gray, overcast sky. Alexander stepped out into the crisp autumn air, the familiar skyline looming in the distance. It felt strange to be back, like stepping into a life he had abandoned but never truly left behind. As he slid into the back seat of the waiting black car, he hesitated before giving the driver Catherine's address. The drive through the city was painfully familiar, each street a reminder of what he had left behind. His fingers tapped against his knee, tension simmering beneath his carefully composed exterior. What if she didn't want to see him? What if the twins had already forgotten him? He shook the thoughts away and focused on the moment ahead. When the car pulled up in front of Catherine's townhouse, he sat there for a long time, staring at the familiar red door. The same wreath she used to hang during the fall still adorned it, a reminder that while his life had changed, hers had continued without him. Finally, he stepped out and walked to the door, his heart pounding in his chest. He raised his hand to knock, hesitated for a moment, then rapped his knuckles against the wood. The door opened, and there she was. Catherine stood there, her hair pulled back, wearing a soft sweater and jeans. She looked surprised, but not entirely shocked, as if she had been expecting this moment to come eventually. "Alexander," she said, her voice cautious but calm. "Hi," he said awkwardly. "Can we talk?" Catherine studied him for a moment before stepping aside. "Come in." The house smelled of vanilla and something baking in the oven. It was warm, lived in, and it hit Alexander with a pang of regret that he had never been a part of it. He stood awkwardly in the living room, feeling like a stranger in what should have been his home. His eyes fell on the framed photos on the mantel, pictures of Olivia and James at the park, at birthdays, in Halloween costumes. A life he had missed. Catherine folded her arms, watching him carefully. "What are you doing here, Alex?" He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I needed to see them." She nodded slowly. "They're at school right now." A beat of silence passed between them before she spoke again, her voice softer this time. "I didn't think you'd come back." "Neither did I," he admitted, sinking onto the couch. "But I couldn't stop thinking about them. About what I walked away from." He looked up at her, his expression raw. "I made a mistake." Catherine sat across from him, her eyes guarded. "And what now? Do you expect to just pick up where you left off?" He shook his head. "I don't know what I expect. I know I don't want to keep running. I want to be in their lives, Catherine." She studied him for a long moment, weighing his words carefully. "It's not that simple," she finally said. "You left, Alex. And I had to pick up the pieces. I've been trying to give them a stable life without you." "I know," he said, his voice strained. "I wasn't ready before. But I am now. I want to know them." Catherine sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I don't want them to get hurt." "I won't hurt them," he said firmly. "I just need a chance." Before she could respond, the sound of tiny voices echoed from the hallway. The front door swung open, and Olivia and James came running inside, their backpacks bouncing behind them. Olivia spotted him first, her eyes widening in surprise. "Mommy, it's the man from the park!" Catherine looked down at them, then back at Alexander. "Yes, sweetheart. This is your dad." James stared at him, his small brow furrowed in curiosity. "You're really my dad?" Alexander crouched down, looking at them both with an expression Catherine hadn't seen in years, genuine warmth. "Yeah, buddy. I am." Olivia giggled, running up and wrapping her arms around his legs without hesitation. "Hi, Daddy." Alexander's throat tightened, and he hugged her back, his hand resting gently on James's shoulder. "Hi, sweetheart." Catherine watched them, a mixture of emotions crossing her face, caution, hope, and something else. She had spent so long being angry at him, but seeing him now, with their children, she realized there was still a small part of her that wanted him to stay. Alexander looked up at her, his eyes silently asking for a chance. She exhaled slowly and nodded. "All right, Alex. Let's take this one step at a time." The relief that washed over him was overwhelming. He wasn't sure where this path would lead, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. Later that evening, as he watched Olivia and James play with their toys, Catherine sat beside him on the couch, a cautious but genuine smile on her face. "Welcome home, Alex." And for the first time in years, he believed it. If you enjoyed this story of love, loss, and second chances, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another heartfelt tale. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Alexander made the right choice? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.